everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Alex and today I'm going to be giving you 20 book recommendations across 10 genres. So that's going to be 2 books per genre. So kicking it off is going to be fantasy, and I have Stardust and The Color of Magic. Stardust by Neil Gaiman is the story of Tristram Thorn, who has decided to go and capture a falling star and bring it home to his dearly beloved. In order to do so, he has to leave his small English town and venture across the wall into the magical world of witches and gnomes. But little does he know that there are other people who are also seeking the star, people who are very dangerous, and that the star itself is actually a person. This is absolutely a fairy tale for grown-ups, and I am a huge fan of Neil Gaiman, and I would recommend that anybody read this book. The Color of Magic by Terry Pratchett is the first novel in the Discworld series that spans over 40 books. All of Pratchett's works are satirical in nature and therefore very fun. A fan favorite character is the Grim Reaper, who is known simply as Death, and he is also the only one who shows up in every single Discworld novel. The Discworld series is broken up into multiple character arcs, and so you don't have to start with The Color of Magic. This is the first story for the wizard Rincewind, but you can begin in other places in the series as well. I personally would recommend starting with The Color of Magic because I am reading the books in chronological order, but there are other YouTubers like Daniel Green who have advised his watchers to not start with The Color of Magic, mostly because this is also Pratchett's messiest novel, which is fair because it was also the first one. His later works in the Discworld series are more well put together, we'll say. And to give you a little bit of background for this world, the Discworld is a flat planet that sits on the back of 4 elephants, who in turn are riding a giant space turtle. The world is full of magic and a lot of zany characters and a lot of puns. Terry Pratchett was probably the punniest man that I have ever read, and these are comfort books for me. I read them when I have either picked up another story that I didn't like very much, or I'm just feeling kind of down and I want something that makes me smile. Up next, I have mystery and thriller recommendations with The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton and Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle is the story of an amnesic main character who wakes up in an unfamiliar body, and he is tasked with solving the murder at a party. Every day he wakes up in the body of another one of the party guests and therefore is able to investigate more clues in order to try to solve the mystery. It's weird, it's fun, it's a book that I would consider to be kind of divisive because in my experience people have either enjoyed it or they haven't. It appealed to me, and I would recommend it to you. Where the Crawdads Sing might seem like an odd choice for a mystery or thriller because so much of the book is about the life of young Kaya as she is growing up in the 1950s swamps of South Carolina. But the rest of the book is a flash forward to the mysterious death of a young man named Chase Andrews, and Kaya is a suspect in that murder. This is a really beautifully written story, and Delia Owens is a zoologist, so she took a lot of time and care in describing the nature of this book, which plays a huge part in the story and also Kaya's love of the swamp. And I can definitely see why they ended up turning it into a movie. I never saw the movie, but I would recommend the book. My next genre is more of an age group because it's children's and middle grade fiction, but I have Roller Girl by Victoria Jameson and The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. So Roller Girl is about our main character named Astrid, and she decides to do roller derby camp over the course of the summer, and she asks her best friend to join with her, but her best friend decides to do a ballet camp instead. This leaves Astrid kind of stranded and lost and lonely while she tries to enter into a new sport that she has never participated in before, and frankly, she's quite terrible at. This is an emotional coming-of-age story and self-discovery book that handles a lot of really great topics, I think, for young teens, and I don't think that it felt very childish at all, even though Astrid is only 12 years old. And this was kind of a spur-of-the-moment pickup for me when I initially got it, but I was really glad that I did. The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman is a story I wish I had picked up when I was a child, but I'm really glad to have discovered when I was an adult. So this is the story of Nobody Owens, who is raised by a bunch of ghosts in a graveyard, and as you can imagine, his experiences growing up make him kind of odd, and he ends up going on these very miraculous and strange adventures. The ending of this book in particular really got me, and I think that anybody should read this regardless of their age. The next genre genre that I have is romance, which admittedly I read very little of, so it was a little difficult for me to come up with some recommendations for this, but I do have two. And the first is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. And the second is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Now, I haven't read any other books by Taylor Jenkins Reid, so I can't speak to those, but for The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, I ended up reading that book in one day, start to finish, which is very odd for me because most of the time I don't do that. I've only ever finished a book in a day twice. And I'm not talking about graphic novels, I'm talking about just full-length regular books. This is about a young woman named Evelyn who is an aspiring actress, and of course when she enters Hollywood she ends up getting introduced to all of these eligible bachelors, 7 of whom she ends up marrying, and none of them are her true love. To give you an idea of just how popular this book was, my library has 5 copies that they keep on their shelves and none of them were available. The book isn't new either. It didn't come out just last month or even last year. It was published in 2017. So the fact that all of the copies were gone pretty much speaks to itself. So you definitely should pick that up if you're a romance fan. And of course, Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen feels like a cop-out because I really read that little romance, but I do believe that this is a classic for a reason. I love this story. I've loved the movies. I love the book. If you're a fan of romances that are a slow burn and are enemies to lovers, well, this is probably the original enemies to lovers book. I don't think I really need to tell anybody what this is about, so I'm going to skip that part, but I did give this 5 stars. Up next is one of my top 2 favorite genres to read, which is horror, and because most of my experience with horror is with reading Stephen King, I felt like it was only fair for me to pick 2 of his novels. So the first that I have is Under the Dome, and the second is The Green Mile. So Under the Dome is the story of a town called Chester's Mill, which for no reason at all is closed off from the world by an invisible and indestructible dome. One of the town leaders named Big Jim decides that this is his perfect moment to rule the town like a dictatorship, and chaos ends up breaking out and a lot of violence ensues. I don't think that I have ever enjoyed cutthroat politics the way that I did in this story, and it paired with the mystery of the dome was honestly just perfect. And do not be fooled by its size. This book is over 1,000 pages. I'm having trouble just holding it up right now while I'm talking, but it is extremely fast-paced. King, in his acknowledgments in the back of the book, said that he wanted this to be like he put down the pedal on the gas and didn't let up for the entirety of the book, and honestly, he accomplished that with flying colors. I was amazed at how much is covered in this book. And it was a lot of fun. It was really dark. You get to know the characters really well. The beginning of the book actually has an index or a list, if you will, of all of the major players that you're going to meet in the town because it's quite a few people. But don't let that deter you. You don't have to remember everybody perfectly, all of the main characters. You're going to know who they are. Trust me. Oh, I gotta give my hand a break. Okay. So, The Green Mile, on the other hand, was actually originally published as a series of 6 novellas, which they eventually turned into one complete book. This is the story of a death row supervisor named Paul Edgecombe and his first encounter with the inmate named John Coffey. Now, John was convicted of the rape and murder of 2 young girls and has been sentenced to death by electrocution in the electric chair. And John seems to possess very unique healing and empathetic abilities. My favorite character in this book is Mr. Jingles, and if you've ever read this or you've seen the movie, you know exactly who that is. I, for one, have never seen the movie with Tom Hanks. I feel like that's practically a sin at this point. I know I need to get on that, but this was my second Stephen King book that I ever read, and honestly that was a fantastic decision. This had a huge impact on me and pretty much solidified my love of Stephen King. For my next genre, I have something that's a little unconventional, a little bit different, which is psychological fiction, and for those 2 novels I have One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by John Kesey and The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is a book that when I finished it, I had to just sit and process it for a second. It's set in an Oregon psychiatric hospital and is a study and critique of psychiatry as a whole, especially for the time in which this was published, which was in 1962. It's narrated by a half Native American man who is known only as Chief, as he watches the struggle between one of the patients named Randall McMurphy and Nurse Ratchet. A major trigger warning for suicide, but if you can handle that, this is an impressive and tragic work, and one that I will be praising probably until the day I die. The Goldfinch, on the other hand, is a book that I have very complicated feelings about. This follows our 13-year-old main character named Theo Decker when he goes to an art museum with his mother, and there is a terrorist attack at the museum and a bunch of bombs go off and his mother is killed. Theo becomes concussed during the bombing and mistakenly ends up grabbing the painting of the Goldfinch, which is a decision that will have long-lasting implications for the rest of his life. This won the Pulitzer Prize in 2014. It's exceptionally well written. I gave it 4 stars for the writing alone. But I hated Theo Decker from the bottom of my heart. He is not a likable person. He's a complex individual. A lot of people really loved this book. I wouldn't necessarily say that they love Theo, but they love the story as a whole. I would definitely say, even despite my dislike of Theo, you should definitely give it a try and, come to your own conclusion. Up next, I have historical fiction, and for those novels, I have All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr and The Book Thief by Markus Zusak. All the Light We Cannot See is the dual story of Mary Law, or Marie Law, if I'm trying to pronounce it correctly, which I can't, who is a blind French girl, and Werner Fennig, who is a young German boy that ends up joining the Hitler Youth because he is found to have an aptitude with building and repairing radios. And it's set during World War II while they are on opposite sides of the German occupation of France. This book made me want to learn more about the experiences of blind people and to also learn a little bit of Braille, so I taught myself the Braille alphabet. A fact that probably seems very strange, but that is something that I did. And this was my first experience with Anthony Doerr, and I thought that it was incredible. And then you have The Book Thief, which is also set during World War II, but is pretty much exclusively only on the German side, and it is about a young girl named Liesel Memminger, and is narrated by Death. Liesel is a young girl who is sent away from her family because her father is a communist being persecuted by the Nazis, and she ends up living with a different German family across the country. The main patriarch of the family she's sent to stay with is a man named Hans Huberman, who Liesel loves very much and kind of views him as if he were her own father. Hans Huberman is this very kind and sympathetic man who does a lot for his community, and he ends up making the decision one night to take in a Jewish man and protect him from the Nazis because Hans is not part of the Nazi party and he refused to join. So you get to learn about Liesel's experience and her perspective of the war while she befriends this Jewish man named Max. This is a really amazing story, and I can definitely see why it was translated into 63 different languages. I also am a big fan of the Grim Reaper. I love different perspectives of death and the way the authors write death as a character, and I think that Markus Zusak did a really great job with portraying death in a way that makes death seem like he has a heart. My next genre is one that's also a little bit different, which is epistolary novels. So those are novels written entirely in letters and correspondences between characters. The first book is The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society by Mary Ann Schaefer and Annie Barrows, and Elemental P by Mark Dunn. The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society was a book I actually read as part of a high school book club, and I immediately fell in love with it. I still loved it the second time that I read it, and honestly, it's been so many years that I think I'm due for a third reading. It's set in 1946 with our main character, who is an author named Juliet Ashton, and she ends up receiving a letter from a young man named Dawsey Adams. Dawsey is one of the founding members of the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society, and Juliet becomes so intrigued when she begins to receive letters from other members of the community that she decides to go visit them and write about them. And in doing so, she ends up learning about the different members of the community and also about one of the founding members named Elizabeth McKenna, who was arrested by the Nazis and sent to prison in France. And yes, this is another World War II book. I didn't realize until I started picking out novels for this video that pretty much all of the history books that I've read that I've loved are set during World War II. Elemental P, on the other hand, is about an island that is set off of the coast of South Carolina. It takes place during modern day, but the people who live on the island do not have any sort of computers or telephones. They live very simple lives. They revere the author named Nevin Nolop, who is very famous for having created the sentence, "The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog," which is the shortest sentence that has ever been created using all of the letters of the alphabet. There is a statue of Nolop in the town center that has his famous phrase at the bottom of it, and the council members who rule in a totalitarian way end up seeing some of the letters fall off of the statue, and when they do, they believe that it is the ghost of Nolop sending them a message that they are no longer to use those letters in any form of communication, verbal or written. So as the story progresses and more letters fall off of the statue, the characters are no longer allowed to use those, and therefore the book adapts to that. So I personally think that it's very fun, it's kind of silly, it's outlandish, it is just a fun book. My next genre is literary fiction, so I have Cloud Cuckoo Land by Anthony Doerr and American Dirt by Janine Cummins. Cloud Cuckoo Land is a time-spanning novel beginning in the 15th century, not World War II, inside the walls of Constantinople with an orphan named Anna. And in this city, famous for its library, she ends up discovering the last moldering copy of the story of Aethon, who is a man who wishes that he can turn into a bird so that he can escape to this utopian city in the sky. And outside of the walls is our character named Omire, who has been conscripted in the war to help tear down the walls. We then jump forward to modern day with an octogenarian named Zeno, who is assisting to put on a children's play, an adapted version of Aethon's story at the local public library. But what nobody knows is there's a young teenage boy named Seymour who is hiding inside the library with a bomb, and he's planning to kill all of them. And then in the not too distant future, we follow a young girl named Constance on an interstellar spaceship called the Argos. She is the last surviving member of the crew, and she's locked away inside this vault, and the only thing that she has to pass the time is to write down the scraps of Aethon's story that she was told by her father. Cloud Cuckoo Land changed the way that I view literature and view stories as a whole, because it made me realize just how fragile stories really are. When you and I decide to tell each other a story, if it's not documented anywhere where anyone can see it, once one of us isn't around to tell the story ever again, it just ceases to exist. And how many stories there are in all of human history that have ever been told that nobody will ever hear again. And how amazing it is when one story, it manages to survive hundreds, if not thousands of years to have an impact on different people. This might sound very dramatic, but I honestly feel like a more complete human being after reading this book, and like a more well-rounded individual. Anthony Doerr has cemented himself as one of my all-time favorite authors, and I will read pretty much anything that he publishes from here on out. Now, American Dirt, on the other hand, is a very different kind of story from Cloud Cuckoo Land. This is the story of Lydia and Luca. So Lydia and Luca live in Acapulco in Mexico, and Lydia's husband is a journalist while she runs a bookstore. And one day there is this man who is very charismatic and charming who walks into the bookstore, and little does Lydia know that he is actually the leader of the local drug cartel. Well, her husband ends up writing a tell-all piece about Javier, who is the drug leader, and Javier has Lydia's entire family murdered. So the only two members of the family to survive are Lydia and Luca, and this is the story of them traveling north in Mexico to try to find safe harbor across the border into the United States. Now, this was an Oprah's Book Club pick for 2020, and I can definitely say that it expanded my view on illegal immigration, especially for those people who are seeking asylum. Now, I know some of you are watching from other countries, and so you're not here in the United States, but it's no secret that illegal immigration is a very political and touchy subject for a lot of people. So my including this in this video is not meant to rile anybody, because I think at the heart of this book, it is a very human story, and yes, there are political implications, but I would like the human element to be the main thing that is focused on here, and it's a really well-written story, and I would recommend that you read it. But if you don't like the political element that goes along with this, then just avoid this recommendation. And last but certainly not least is my favorite genre, and that is science fiction. Now, the reason why I decided to leave this until the end is because I actually made an entire video on my top 10 must-read sci-fi novels. And if you haven't watched that, I would highly recommend that you go check it out, because the 2 books that I'm about to describe to you are books that I include in that list. And those books are Recursion by Blake Crouch and Leviathan Wakes by James S.A. Corey. Now, Recursion is the story of Detective Barry Sutton, who is investigating false memory syndrome, which is an illness that is kind of sweeping the world, and it causes people to have memories of a life that they never lived. And it also, because of that, causes a lot of people to commit suicide because they feel like they're going crazy. We also get the perspective of Helena Smith, who is a neuroscientist, and she is the one that holds the answer to what false memory syndrome is and where it comes from. This is truly, as a whole, probably one of the best books I've ever read. It's shocking, it's stunning, it's unique. There's time travel elements in here, which is done in a way that I have never seen done in another book before, so if that intrigues you, I would definitely pick this up. Leviathan Wakes was a little bit lower on my top 10 list. It wasn't in even my top 3, but the reason why I included it here is because a lot of people who enjoy science fiction love a good space opera, and that is absolutely what this series is. This is part of the Expanse series. It was also turned into a TV show, but the TV show is nothing like the books, and I personally didn't like it, so I stopped watching it, but the book is incredible. The book predominantly follows 2 people, so you have James Holden, who is the first lieutenant of an ice hauler called the Canterbury, and he and his crew end up receiving a distress signal from an abandoned ship out in space, and when they go to investigate it, they end up uncovering a deadly secret. And then you have Josephus Miller, who is a blind drunk detective who takes on a contract to kidnap a woman on behalf of her family, and in doing so, he also ends up learning part of that secret that James Holden and his crew do, but Josephus decides to do something a little bit different, and he is determined to find this woman. I really love the cultural differences in this story. So you have pretty much 3 main places that any of the characters would come from, which is Earth, Mars, or the Belt. And the people who are in the asteroid belt are known as Belters, and they have their own language. They're extremely tall because of the low gravity, and there's just a lot of really good world building that happens in this story, and I'm really looking forward to reading the sequel. And I've even convinced Keaton to read this. He is interested in picking this up at some point in the future, so hopefully you might be interested in it too. And those are my 20 book recommendations for you all. So I really hope that you enjoyed this video. I know I certainly enjoyed making it. Please feel free to leave me a comment down below if you have any recommendations for me. And as always, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day or evening, that you all stay safe out there, and I'll see you next time.